Hello everyone and welcome to a continuation of our mini lectures on psychological disorders. Today we are talking about anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorder, and PTSD. This is part 1 of 2. So first off, talking about anxiety disorders. Anxiety is an unpleasant emotional state accompanied by physical arousal, feelings of tension, apprehension, and worry, and alertness. Anxiety is a normal and healthy feeling. We all feel anxiety about any number of things, and in mild to moderate doses, this can be a good thing. It might motivate us to work on that term paper or to avoid a dangerous situation, so anxiety in itself is not a bad thing. Anxiety becomes disordered when, like other things we've talked about, it becomes disruptive and distressing. So anxiety disorders are accompanied by extreme anxiety, so much more than your ordinary sort of healthy level of anxiety. This produces a significant disruption in cognitive, behavioral, and or interpersonal functioning, so it's disruptive to your life and very distressing. And this is an irrational, uncomfortable, and disruptive sort of anxiety. So again, just a much more severe form of your ordinary day-to-day anxiety. Generalized anxiety disorder is what it sounds like, a excessive, global, and persistent form of anxiety. This is distressing and it causes impairment in day-to-day life. So generalized anxiety is just sort of this sort of general worrisome feeling. It might be attached to a certain stressor, like maybe you're worried about a term paper or something like that, or it might be just a more general sort of free-floating form of anxiety. But in the case that it is attached to something specific, addressing that doesn't usually make the feeling of general anxiety go away. It just might move to something else, or something else might just sort of fill the place. So it's a general, persistent, global sort of feeling of anxiety that's not really tied permanently to a specific stressor or provoker of anxiety. So panic attacks are a sudden episode of extreme anxiety. This isn't just extreme anxiety in the sense of, oh no, I forgot something really important, I didn't turn that test in, or I left my car unlocked, or I'm worried about this meeting I'm about to have. A panic attack is really, really extreme. So it's accompanied, so it accelerates in its intensity very, very rapidly. And it's accompanied by physiological symptoms like racing heart, shortness of breath. In fact, the symptoms of a panic attack are often so severe that people suffering from one confuse them for a heart attack and will report to the emergency room to find that they're only having a panic attack. Panic disorder is just a disorder marked by frequent panic attacks. All right, and on to specific phobias. This is what it sounds like. You might already have an intuitive understanding of what a phobia is. It's a persistent and irrational fear of a specific object, situation, or activity. Depending how severe the phobia is, this can provoke a panic attack if you're exposed to the object of your phobia in sort of a close and inescapable situation. Specific phobias affect about 13% of the population, and they are more common in women. One interesting example of a specific phobia is trypophobia, which is fear or disgust provoked from closely packed holes. So like this image here of a lotus plant's seed pod, if that makes you feel extremely uncomfortable or you have a fear sort of response to that, you might have trypophobia. It's not super common, but it's got a lot of attention recently. Another example that's a bit more common is agoraphobia, which is the word itself means fear of marketplace or fear of a public forum. It's fear and avoidance of places or situations that make you feel trapped, embarrassed, or helpless. This is often manifested in sort of a liking to avoid going out in public or avoiding interactions with others in a place where you feel like you can't get away. This is often also accompanied by an extreme fear of experiencing a panic attack or some other embarrassing symptom in public when you can't escape or get away from it. Generally, when we're talking about specific phobias, there are 4 general categories that comprise this. One would be particular situations, so some things we've talked about like agoraphobia, being afraid of being in a situation full of other people where you can't get away easily. Features of a natural environment, these are things like being afraid of heights or open water, things that can be dangerous to you that occur naturally. Injury or blood, that's pretty self-explanatory. And animals or insects, so something like entomophobia or fear of insects, which I kind of get. I don't have a phobia per se, but I really, really hate stinging insects. I mean, I've been stung a couple of times. It was no big deal. I'm not allergic or anything. Some dumb part of my brain comes on when I see a wasp, and I just become very unreasonable and try to avoid it. Okay, the next sort of anxiety disorder we're talking about is social anxiety disorder. This is an extreme and irrational fear of being embarrassed, judged, or scrutinized by others. This is distinct from something like agoraphobia because you're not really afraid of having an embarrassing incident and where you cannot be escaped and you feel threatened by that. This is more just sort of a social pressure type thing where you are fearful of what others might think of you. This is one of the most common anxiety type disorders. It affects many, many people. It is more common in women, and it can vary a bit by culture. So what it looks like in terms of actual symptomology is kind of culture bound. So one example of this is Taijin Kyofoshu, which is, I'm sure I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. This is a variant present in Japanese culture where it's a fear that the appearance, smell, facial expression, or odor that you're presenting with will offend or insult others. So it's less that, I guess the slight difference is less that you're concerned about being judged or scrutinized, but you're more concerned about bothering other people. And this sort of comes from the more collectivistic type culture where it's more concerned with group harmony. So that's just sort of a flavor that takes on as a basis of culture. And I do want to mention before we move on that social anxiety disorder isn't really the same as just having a socially sort of anxious experience. Like you might be nervous to meet somebody or to speak publicly. Or for an example from my life, I met a new person recently, and with the spreading pandemic, they went for a handshake, and my brain kind of froze halfway in between going for the handshake and wanting to distance myself, and I just stood there and didn't do anything and also didn't explain myself. So I am worried about encountering that person again because they came off super weird. But that's not really the same as social anxiety disorder, right? For something to be a disorder, it has to be both disruptive and distressing, right? It has to be kind of a severe disruption of life, whereas having an awkward situation now and then is pretty normal. Just like we'll talk about with obsessive compulsive disorder, liking things to be neatly lined up isn't the same as having a proper disorder. So, just one last word on phobias before we wrap this video up. We can talk about specific phobias from the angle of sort of an evolutionary perspective, where certain fears may have an evolutionary history that have made them more adaptive. Right? It's sort of adapted to be afraid of darkness because humans can't see very well in the dark. Snakes are poisonous and dangerous. Heights, if you fall from heights, they'll make you die. So it's adaptive to be fearful of these things. But the evolutionary component comes in because people very rarely have an innate phobia of something like guns or cars, despite those things being much more likely to be deadly. All right, that's it for this video. See you next time for the part 2.